Most humans believe their lives end because their bodies fail, but biology tells a quieter, more uncomfortable story. Across most of human history, survival was not about living long. It was about completing a role, raising children, passing on knowledge, holding a group together just long enough. Once that role was fulfilled, evolution stopped investing. The body did not collapse immediately, but it slowly lost its reason to be repaired. Old age was not designed as a final chapter. It was an after effect, a stretch of time with no clear biological purpose. And when purpose fades before life ends, something subtle begins to break long before death arrives. So the question is not why humans die. The question is, what happens to a life when its purpose is already gone, but time keeps going? Most human lives are often described as journeys measured by years, but for most of our evolutionary history, life was not organized around time at all. It was organized around purpose. Long before calendars, birthdays, or recorded ages existed, survival depended on completing a small set of biological tasks. Find food, avoid danger, reproduce, protect the young long enough for them to survive on their own. In this framework, a life was not judged by how long it lasted, but by whether these tasks were successfully completed. Natural selection did not reward longevity in itself. It rewarded effectiveness within a narrow window of usefulness. A body that survived long enough to pass on its genes had already fulfilled evolution's primary requirement. Anything that happened afterward existed outside the main field of evolutionary concern. This is difficult to accept today, because modern societies treat long life as a clear success. But from a biological perspective, early humans were never shaped to maximize years lived. They were shaped to maximize continuity of the group. Once that continuity was secured, the intense pressure to maintain the body eased. Muscles weakened more easily. Repair systems became less precise. Small failures accumulated without strong corrective forces. This was not because nature wanted humans to decline, but because there was no strong evolutionary reason to prevent it. In harsh prehistoric environments, resources were limited and energy was precious. Investing heavily in bodies that had already completed their reproductive role did not significantly increase the survival of the group. Selection favored traits that worked early and reliably, even if they came with long-term costs. Many of the biological features that allow humans to survive childhood, reach maturity, and reproduce efficiently also carry hidden consequences later in life. These consequences were mostly invisible to evolution because they appeared after the critical tasks were done. In that sense, aging was not a planned stage of life. It was a byproduct, a long echo following the completion of purpose. This explains why, across cultures and eras, old age often appeared as an uncertain state rather than a clearly defined role. Early human groups sometimes valued elders for memory and experience, but this was a secondary benefit, not the original design. The core structure of human biology remained focused on early survival and reproduction. When we look at human anatomy, metabolism, and disease patterns today, we still see this ancient priority system embedded within us. Our bodies perform remarkably well in early and middle life, then gradually lose coordination and resilience. This decline is not sudden, and it is not uniform, but it follows a consistent direction. Purpose arrives early, maintenance fades later. Modern humans live in a world where technology, medicine, and social systems have stretched life far beyond its original evolutionary frame. But the underlying biological logic has not changed. Many people reach ages that their bodies were never optimized to sustain. As a result, the later decades of life can feel strangely disconnected from the earlier ones. Not because something has gone wrong individually, but because the structure of human life has been extended beyond the point where evolution was strongly invested. To understand why many human lives feel as though they end after their purpose is gone, we must first accept this quiet truth. Longevity was never the goal. Purpose came first. Everything that followed was incidental. In the earliest stages of human existence, there was no shared idea of a full life measured from birth to old age. There was only the urgency of remaining alive long enough to complete what mattered biologically. Early humans lived inside narrow margins of survival, where injury, infection, hunger, and exposure constantly erased those who fell behind. In such conditions, life unfolded as a sequence of immediate problems rather than a long narrative. Each day demanded energy, attention, and physical resilience. The body was shaped to respond well to these demands early, when strength, speed, and recovery mattered most. Youth was not celebrated as a stage of identity. It was simply the phase when the body functioned at its highest efficiency. This efficiency allowed individuals to secure food, defend territory, and form bonds that led to reproduction. Once offspring arrived, another critical phase began. Survival now depended on maintaining enough physical and cognitive capacity to protect the young until they could survive independently. For most of human history, this window was short. Childhood was dangerous, and adulthood was brief. The biological focus remained intensely concentrated on these early decades. There was little evolutionary advantage in maintaining a body far beyond this period. Energy invested in long-term maintenance could not be used elsewhere. As a result, human biology favored systems that worked quickly and powerfully early in life, even if they degraded later. This pattern can still be seen in how the human body allocates resources. Growth, reproduction, and immune strength peak relatively early, then slowly decline. This is not an error or a malfunction. It reflects a priority system inherited from deep time. In small, mobile groups, the loss of older individuals did not necessarily weaken survival. Knowledge could be passed orally and quickly. Skills were learned through imitation. The group adapted continuously. Longevity, as a biological trait, did not dramatically improve reproductive success once offspring survival was secured. Because of this, there was no consistent pressure to extend the body's durability far beyond its core tasks. What we now call aging emerged silently from this imbalance. Repair systems became less accurate. Cells accumulated damage. The body continued functioning, but without the same precision it once had. These changes were slow enough that they did not interfere with early survival, which is why they remained invisible to selection. From the outside, this may appear harsh, but evolution does not operate on comfort or meaning. It operates on persistence across generations. Anything that does not significantly improve that persistence is gradually ignored. This is why early human life had no clear endpoint in the way we imagine today. There was no defined transition into old age. There was only a gradual reduction in biological urgency. When strength faded and recovery slowed, individuals were no longer central to the immediate survival loop. Some continued to contribute through experience and memory, but this was variable and dependent on environment. It was never guaranteed. Over time, this pattern became embedded in human physiology. The body learned how to build itself quickly and how to decline slowly, but it never learned how to sustain itself indefinitely. When modern humans reflect on life feeling unfinished or hollow in later years, they are often responding to this ancient structure. Purpose arrived early and clearly. What followed was uncharted territory. Understanding this helps explain why many lives feel as though they end not with death, but with the quiet disappearance of necessity. The body continues, but the original reason for its existence has already passed. As human groups slowly grew more stable, something subtle began to change, but not in the way modern people often imagine. The environment became slightly more predictable, camps were reused, tools improved, cooperation increased, yet the underlying biological logic of human life remained the same. Survival still depended on early strength, rapid learning, and successful reproduction. Even as living conditions improved marginally, evolution did not rewrite the body's priorities. It only softened the edges of an ancient design. Human physiology continued to operate as if life was short and uncertain, because for most individuals, it still was. This is why the human body does not age gracefully or evenly. It ages unevenly, with some systems failing earlier than others, reflecting which functions were most critical early in life and which were considered expendable later. Bones, joints, and connective tissues, for example, perform intensely during youth and early adulthood, then slowly lose resilience. The same is true for immune responses, hormonal regulation, and cellular repair. These systems are powerful when they are most needed, then gradually become less precise. This pattern reveals something important. Aging is not a stage that begins at a specific moment. It is the gradual withdrawal of biological attention. The body is not actively moving toward decline. It is simply no longer being fully maintained. In early human contexts, this withdrawal had little consequence for the group's survival. Younger members carried the physical load. The collective adapted. There was no evolutionary penalty for letting older bodies drift into fragility. Over thousands of generations, this quiet logic became fixed. Human life came to consist of two unequal halves. A front-loaded period of intense biological investment, followed by a long tail of reduced priority. Modern humans experience this tail as old age. But from an evolutionary standpoint, it is not a planned destination. It is a leftover interval created by improved survival without corresponding redesign. This explains why extended life often feels biologically awkward. The body persists, but without a clear internal signal guiding what it is persisting for. In early human groups, meaning was tightly bound to necessity. You were needed because the group could not function without your contribution. Once physical contribution declined, necessity faded. Some individuals found secondary roles through memory, storytelling, or social cohesion, but these roles were not guaranteed by biology. They depended on culture and circumstance. This distinction matters deeply today. Modern societies have dramatically extended lifespan through medicine, sanitation, and nutrition, but they have not altered the underlying structure of human biology. The body still follows an ancient script. It invests early, then slowly disengages. When people reach later life and feel that something essential has ended before life itself does, they are not imagining it. They are sensing the gap between biological design and extended existence. This gap can feel like emptiness, but it is not a personal failure. It is a structural one. Evolution provided a body capable of fulfilling a purpose, not of sustaining purpose indefinitely. Once that original purpose is complete, the body continues out of momentum rather than direction. Understanding this does not diminish the value of long life. Instead, it clarifies why long life requires something evolution never supplied on its own, a new source of meaning, created consciously rather than inherited biologically. Without that, many lives feel as though they quietly conclude long before the body stops breathing, not because life has no value, but because its original function has already been fulfilled, and nothing automatic rises to replace it. For most of human history, survival was not something that unfolded across a predictable lifespan. It was a task-oriented struggle, shaped by immediate needs rather than long-term plans. Early humans did not wake up expecting to grow old. They woke up expecting to survive the day. Food had to be found, shelter had to be maintained, threats had to be avoided. In this environment, time itself was not experienced as a continuous future stretching ahead. It was experienced as a series of urgent moments, each demanding action. The body adapted to this rhythm. Strength, alertness, and rapid recovery were favored because they solved immediate problems. There was no advantage in designing a body for decades of continued operation after those problems had already been resolved. Survival was not a timeline. It was a checklist. Once the essential tasks were completed, the biological pressure eased. This way of living shaped how human life was structured at its core. Childhood prepared the body quickly for contribution. Adulthood delivered peak physical and cognitive performance. Beyond that point, there was no clear evolutionary instruction for what should come next. The absence of instruction did not stop life from continuing, but it removed urgency from maintaining it. In small groups constantly on the edge of scarcity, resources were allocated where they mattered most. A body that could no longer hunt, gather, or defend did not enhance group survival in the same way a younger body did. This was not cruelty, it was arithmetic. Energy invested in one place could not be invested elsewhere. Over generations, this logic became encoded into human physiology. The systems that supported survival early in life were reinforced. The systems that would have supported long-term maintenance were left incomplete. As a result, human biology became exceptionally good at getting bodies to maturity and only moderately good at keeping them there. This is why many age-related changes appear gradual and diffuse rather than sudden or targeted. There is no single switch that turns aging on. There is simply a slow reduction in biological attention once the primary tasks are finished. In early human environments, this reduction often coincided closely with death, because external dangers remained high. But as conditions improved, the gap widened. Life extended into territory that biology had never clearly mapped. Modern humans now live deep inside that gap. They experience years and even decades that are biologically quiet, lacking the urgency that once defined survival. This quiet can feel unsettling. Without immediate threats or clear tasks, time becomes visible in a way it never was before. Days stretch. Roles become less defined. The body continues, but without the same internal signals that once guided effort and repair. This is not because something has been taken away. It is because nothing was ever built to fill this space. The idea that life should naturally provide meaning across an extended lifespan is a modern expectation, not an ancient one. Early humans lived within narrow bands of necessity. When necessity ended, life often ended shortly after. What we now experience as long life after purpose is the result of survival extending beyond its original frame. Understanding this helps reframe the discomfort many people feel later in life. It is not a failure to adapt personally. It is the experience of living beyond a structure that was designed around tasks, not time. When survival is no longer a task, and no new biological purpose appears, the human experience changes in subtle but profound ways. Life continues, but it no longer moves forward with the same internal momentum. In a world governed by immediate demands, the human mind learned to orient itself toward problems that needed solving now, not later. Early cognition evolved to scan the environment for danger, opportunity, and social signals that affected survival in the present moment. Memory was practical, storing information about landscapes, seasons, tools, and relationships that could be applied quickly. There was little reason to imagine a distant future beyond the next migration, the next hunt, or the next birth. This shaped not only how humans lived, but how they experienced time itself. The future was short, compressed, and uncertain. Planning existed, but only within narrow bounds. The body and mind worked together to prioritize what mattered immediately. As long as those priorities were met, life continued. When they were not, life often ended abruptly. This context explains why the human nervous system remains deeply responsive to urgency and threat, even in modern settings where survival is largely secured. The brain is still calibrated for a task-based existence. It responds strongly to goals, responsibilities, and roles that demand attention. When these elements are present, energy flows easily, focus sharpens, motivation feels natural. But when clear tasks fade, the system does not smoothly transition into rest or contentment. Instead, it often enters a state of quiet restlessness. This is not a flaw in character or psychology. It is a mismatch between ancient design and extended time. In early human groups, periods without clear tasks were rare and brief. Hunger, danger, and social obligations quickly reasserted themselves. There was little opportunity for prolonged aimlessness. Today, many people reach stages of life where the urgent tasks of survival and reproduction are largely complete. Children are grown. Work roles diminish or end. Physical demands decrease. Yet the nervous system remains tuned to a world where purpose arises from necessity. Without necessity, the internal signals that once structured daily life weaken. Time begins to feel different. Days stretch without clear markers. The sense of moving towards something diminishes. This experience is often interpreted as loss, boredom, or emptiness, but it is more accurately described as biological silence. The systems that once generated momentum are no longer being strongly activated. In evolutionary terms, this silence was never meant to last long. External pressures usually closed the gap quickly. Death often followed soon after the end of active contribution. But modern conditions have interrupted this pattern. Safety, medicine, and social stability have extended life far beyond the period of intense task engagement. The result is a long interval where the body and mind persist without the structures that once guided them. This interval can feel unsettling because it lacks the cues that evolution relied on to organize experience. The absence of urgency is not immediately soothing. For a system built around action, it can feel disorienting. Many people attempt to fill this space with distractions, routines, or artificial goals, often without understanding why the space exists in the first place. They may feel that something essential has been lost, when in fact they have entered a phase that biology never clearly defined. The human organism is still capable of perception, thought, and emotion, but it no longer receives strong internal instructions about what to do with them. This helps explain why later life can feel simultaneously calmer and more fragile. Calm, because the pressures of survival have eased. Fragile, because the ancient engine that once drove effort and repair is no longer fully engaged. Recognizing this pattern allows for a more compassionate understanding of the later stages of life. The discomfort many experience is not evidence of failure or decline alone. It is the natural outcome of living in a time-rich environment with a body and mind designed for task-bound survival. Life continues, but it does so in a quieter register, one that requires forms of meaning that biology alone does not automatically provide. As survival pressures loosened slightly over time, the structure of daily life changed, but the internal architecture of the human organism did not. Agriculture, permanent settlements, and later complex societies reduced the constant urgency that once defined existence. Food became more predictable, threats became less immediate, social roles stabilized. Yet the body and mind still operated according to an older rhythm, one shaped in environments where prolonged safety was rare. This created a growing distance between how life was lived and how it was biologically organized. Tasks still existed, but they were no longer strictly tied to survival in the same way. The checklist that once governed life became longer, softer, and less decisive. For a time, culture absorbed this shift. New roles emerged. Elders were sometimes given responsibility through ritual, governance, or teaching. These roles helped bridge the gap between declining biological urgency and continued existence. But they were cultural solutions layered on top of a biological foundation that remained unchanged. The body did not evolve new systems to support extended relevance. It continued to follow its ancient pattern of early investment and gradual withdrawal. As societies became more complex, this mismatch deepened. People lived longer than ever before, but the number of roles that felt necessary did not expand at the same rate. Many tasks became abstract, symbolic, or delayed. Survival was no longer at stake in daily decisions. The nervous system, still tuned to immediate consequence, struggled to fully engage. This is why effort can feel heavier later in life, even when physical demands are lower. The internal sense of necessity has weakened. Without necessity, motivation must be manufactured rather than arising naturally. This marks a profound shift in the human experience. For most of our evolutionary past, meaning was embedded in survival itself. You did what needed to be done because the alternative was disappearance. In modern contexts, disappearance is postponed, sometimes indefinitely. Life stretches on, but the original engine of meaning no longer drives it forward. This does not mean later life is empty by default. It means it is undefined by biology. The extended years that follow the completion of core tasks exist in a space evolution never fully accounted for. They require structures that were once unnecessary. When those structures are absent or weak, life can feel as though it has lost direction, even while remaining comfortable. The body continues to age according to its ancient script, gradually reducing repair and resilience. The mind continues to seek relevance and engagement, but without clear signals about where to direct them. This combination can produce a subtle sense of ending long before death arrives. Not an ending marked by crisis, but by a fading of momentum. Understanding this helps explain why modern longevity often comes with psychological and existential challenges that earlier humans rarely faced. They did not live long enough beyond necessity to confront them. We do, and in doing so we are living inside a gap created by progress without redesign. A gap between task-based survival and time-based existence. Recognizing this gap does not solve it, but it clarifies why it exists. Human life has extended beyond the point where biology provides clear instructions. What remains is time, sustained by systems never meant to guide it. How that time is experienced depends not on evolution, but on what humans choose to build in its place. At the center of human biology lies a simple priority that shaped everything else. Before culture, before language, before memory carried meaning beyond the present moment, reproduction determined which bodies mattered to the future. From an evolutionary perspective, a human life was successful not because it endured, but because it continued itself. Passing genes forward was the only outcome that persisted beyond death. Every system within the body reflects this quiet focus. Growth accelerates rapidly after birth. Puberty reorganizes the body around reproductive capability. Hormones reshape bone, muscle, fat distribution, and behavior to support mating and childbearing. Immune strength peaks to protect fertility and early parenthood. These changes are not subtle. They represent an enormous biological investment concentrated into a relatively short window of time. Once reproduction becomes possible, the body enters its most heavily supported phase. Energy allocation, repair mechanisms, and resilience all work at their highest levels. This is not coincidence. It is design shaped by selection. A body that fails before reproduction leaves no trace. A body that succeeds only needs to last long enough for offspring to survive. Beyond that, evolution grows increasingly indifferent. This indifference does not appear as sudden decline. It appears as silence. Systems remain in place, but they are no longer aggressively optimized. Cellular repair becomes less exact. Hormonal signaling loses precision. Damage accumulates slowly, not because it is desired, but because preventing it offers diminishing returns. In early human environments, this shift rarely created long periods of decline. Death from injury, disease, or scarcity often followed not long after reproductive years ended. Because of this, the later consequences of reduced maintenance remained largely invisible to selection. Reproduction did not simply mark a milestone in life. It defined the boundary of evolutionary attention. The body behaves as though its primary obligation has been fulfilled once the next generation is secure. Parenting extends this obligation briefly. Caring for dependent children requires continued strength and awareness. But once children reach independence, the biological contract is effectively complete. There is no further requirement encoded into the body's structure. This explains why many age-related changes begin subtly in midlife rather than at extreme old age. They reflect the gradual release of pressure rather than the onset of a programmed end. From the outside, this can look like betrayal. The body that once supported effort and growth now begins to resist it. Recovery slows, vulnerabilities emerge. But from the perspective of evolution, nothing has gone wrong. The central task has been completed. What follows exists outside the zone of strong selection. In modern societies, this transition is deeply unsettling because reproduction no longer defines purpose so narrowly. People invest meaning in work, relationships, creativity, and personal development far beyond childbearing years. Yet the body does not recognize these goals in the same way. It continues to follow its ancient logic. When reproductive relevance fades, biological urgency fades with it. This creates a profound mismatch. Individuals remain mentally active and emotionally engaged, but their bodies no longer receive the same internal signals to maintain peak function. The sense that life begins to decline after purpose is fulfilled is not purely psychological. It is rooted in this shift of biological attention. The body does not abandon life, but it stops prioritizing it with the same intensity. Understanding this helps clarify why later life often feels like a period of maintenance rather than expansion. The underlying systems were never designed to support indefinite growth or renewal. They were designed to ensure continuation, not permanence. Once continuation is achieved, the biological narrative loses its central direction. What remains is life sustained by momentum rather than necessity. This does not strip life of value, but it reveals why value must increasingly come from sources that biology itself does not supply. When reproduction ends as the primary driver, the body steps back. Time continues, but the original reason for being has already been quietly fulfilled. Reproduction does not operate in isolation. It is supported by a network of biological systems that rise and fall together. When fertility is high, many other functions quietly align to protect it. Bone density is maintained. Muscle mass is easier to preserve. Skin repairs itself more efficiently. The immune system responds quickly to threats. These features are often described separately in modern medicine, but evolution treated them as a coordinated package. Their shared purpose was not comfort or longevity. It was reliability during the reproductive years. Once that reliability was no longer essential, the coordination loosened. The systems did not shut down, but they stopped reinforcing one another with the same intensity. This is why aging appears as a gradual unraveling rather than a clean transition. Small inefficiencies accumulate across multiple systems at once. Hormonal signaling becomes less stable. Inflammation lingers longer after injury or infection. Cellular damage is tolerated rather than aggressively corrected. None of this is random. It reflects a shift in biological priorities. The body is still alive, but it is no longer operating under the same mandate. From an evolutionary perspective, investing heavily in long-term maintenance after reproduction offers little return. Offspring have already been produced. Genetic material has already moved forward. Additional years lived by the parent do not significantly increase reproductive success in most environments. Because of this, the mechanisms that would have supported indefinite repair were never strongly selected for. What exists instead is a compromise. The body remains functional enough to persist, but not optimized enough to resist slow decline. This compromise worked well in ancestral conditions, where external dangers often ended life before internal degradation became dominant. In modern conditions, the compromise is exposed. People live long enough to experience the consequences of reduced maintenance directly. They feel the body becoming less cooperative, not because it has failed, but because it has shifted into a lower investment mode. This experience can feel personal and unfair, but it is deeply impersonal. It arises from a system that was never designed to sustain peak function indefinitely. Reproduction shaped not only the body, but the timing of its strengths and weaknesses. The peak arrives early because it must. The decline arrives gradually because nothing prevents it. Parenting extends the period of investment slightly, as caring for dependent children requires continued resilience. But once children are self-sufficient, even that extension loses urgency. The biological signal that once justified continued maintenance fades. This explains why many people notice changes beginning earlier than expected. The body is responding to an ancient schedule, not to modern expectations. Cultural narratives often suggest that decline should be postponed indefinitely through effort, discipline, or intervention. While these factors can influence health, they do not rewrite the underlying logic. The body still follows a pattern shaped by reproduction-first priorities. When that chapter closes, the intensity of biological support diminishes. This does not mean later life is meaningless. It means meaning is no longer supplied automatically by biology. The body no longer organizes itself around a clear, shared goal. What remains is a collection of systems operating without a unifying imperative. This absence can feel like loss, but it is more accurately described as completion. The primary task has been finished. The body continues not because it is driven to expand further, but because stopping immediately would have offered no additional advantage. Life extends beyond its original purpose as a byproduct of success, not as a planned reward. Recognizing this helps explain why so many people sense a quiet ending long before death. The systems that once aligned around reproduction and survival are no longer tightly bound. The body persists, but its reason for being has already been fulfilled. As reproduction and direct caregiving recede, the human body enters a phase that is often misunderstood as failure, but is more accurately described as release. The systems that once operated in tight coordination no longer receive strong signals to remain synchronized. This does not produce immediate collapse. Instead, it produces variability. Some functions remain strong while others weaken, energy levels fluctuate, recovery becomes unpredictable. The body no longer behaves as a unified project aimed at a single outcome. It behaves as a collection of systems, each maintaining itself only as much as necessary. In ancestral environments, this shift was rarely noticed because life rarely extended far beyond it. External pressures usually intervened. In modern life, the shift becomes visible and prolonged. People live inside it for years or decades. This extended exposure reveals a truth that evolution never needed to address. The body can continue without purpose, but it cannot supply a new one on its own. Biological processes do not generate replacement goals once reproduction and protection of offspring are complete. They simply continue at a lower level of urgency. This is why later life often feels like a period of maintenance rather than momentum. The internal drive that once pushed growth, adaptation, and repair no longer dominates experience. What remains is time sustained by habit rather than necessity. Many cultures attempt to reinterpret this phase through moral, spiritual, or social frameworks, assigning new meanings to age and endurance. These frameworks can be powerful, but they are external additions. They do not arise from biology itself. The body remains neutral. It does not reward extended existence with renewed strength or clarity. It only allows it to persist. This neutrality can feel unsettling because it contrasts sharply with earlier life, when effort was met with rapid response. In youth and early adulthood, the body answers demands quickly. It heals, adapts, and strengthens. Later, the same demands produce weaker returns. This is not punishment. It is the result of a completed mandate. The biological contract that once justified intense investment has already been fulfilled. Nothing inside the body insists on starting a new one. Modern humans often interpret this as loss of usefulness or relevance. But from an evolutionary standpoint, usefulness was never meant to extend indefinitely. It was tied to specific outcomes, achieved early. When those outcomes are secure, the body steps back. Life continues, but without the same internal direction. This creates a quiet tension. Consciousness remains active. Memory accumulates. Reflection deepens. Yet the biological systems that once translated intention into robust action no longer fully cooperate. This gap between awareness and capacity can produce a sense that life has already ended in some essential way, not because the person is gone, but because the structure that once organized their existence has dissolved. Understanding this does not remove the difficulty of later life, but it reframes it. The feeling that purpose has vanished before life ends is not a personal anomaly. It is the expected outcome of a system designed to finish its primary work early. What follows exists beyond biological design. It is time unclaimed by evolution. Whether that time feels empty or meaningful depends entirely on what is placed into it. Biology does not object either way. It has already done what it was built to do. As the reproductive phase concludes and biological urgency declines, another process becomes more visible. One that often feels mysterious but follows a clear evolutionary logic. This is the gradual reduction of maintenance. The human body is not built to repair itself equally at all times. Repair is costly. Every correction of cellular damage, every immune response, every replacement of worn tissue requires energy and coordination. In early life, these costs are justified because they protect future reproduction and the survival of dependent offspring. Later, the same level of investment offers diminishing returns. Evolution responds to this imbalance not with a shutdown, but with a quiet reprioritization. Maintenance continues, but at a lower intensity. The body tolerates imperfections it once would have corrected. Damage accumulates not because the body fails to notice it, but because correcting it no longer holds the same biological value. This shift explains why aging rarely feels like a single event. It feels like a spreading softness, a gradual loss of precision. Systems that once worked in harmony begin to drift slightly out of sync. Repair becomes slower and less exact. In ancestral environments, this reduction rarely produced prolonged suffering. External dangers often ended life before internal decline became dominant. As a result, natural selection never faced strong pressure to perfect long-term maintenance. The human body emerged with robust early defenses and modest late ones. This design worked well enough to ensure continuation across generations. Modern conditions have changed the context, but not the design. Today, medicine shields the body from many external threats, allowing people to live long enough to experience the full consequences of reduced maintenance. What once remained hidden now becomes central to daily life. Joints wear unevenly. Organs lose reserve capacity. The immune system reacts more slowly and sometimes inappropriately. These changes are often framed as breakdowns, but they are better understood as expressions of an ancient trade-off. Resources once allocated to reproduction and early survival are no longer directed toward aggressive upkeep. The body persists, but it does so with fewer internal corrections. This can feel like abandonment, but it is more accurately described as neutrality. The body is no longer being actively protected by evolution's strongest forces. It is allowed to age. This allowance was never intended as punishment. It was simply irrelevant to reproductive success. Over time, this logic became embedded in human physiology. The systems responsible for long-term maintenance were never optimized for extended use. They were optimized for adequacy, not permanence. When people reach later life and notice that effort no longer produces the same results, they are encountering this design directly. The body still responds, but less decisively. Recovery takes longer. Small issues persist. The margin for error narrows. This experience can feel deeply personal, but it is shared across the species. It reflects a universal shift in biological investment rather than individual failure. Understanding this helps explain why aging often feels like a slow withdrawal rather than an active descent. The body is not moving toward an endpoint with intention. It is simply no longer being pulled forward by the same evolutionary priorities. Life continues in a quieter mode, sustained by systems that were never meant to carry it indefinitely. The sense that something essential has faded is not illusion. It is the perception of maintenance receding once its original purpose has been fulfilled. As maintenance weakens, the consequences do not appear all at once. They surface unevenly, revealing how different systems were prioritized at different times. Some tissues retain resilience longer because they were essential early. Others decline sooner because they offered little advantage after reproduction. This unevenness often surprises people, who expect aging to move uniformly across the body. Instead, it unfolds in a scattered pattern. Vision changes while strength remains. Memory sharpens even as joints stiffen. The body does not age as a single unit because it was never maintained as one. Each system followed its own cost-benefit logic, shaped by early survival. Where investment once mattered most, durability remains higher. Where it mattered less, tolerance for damage increases. This explains why many age-related conditions feel disconnected from one another. They are not parts of a single program, but outcomes of many small compromises made over evolutionary time. The immune system offers a clear example. Early in life, it responds aggressively, because infection threatens reproduction and child survival. Later, its precision declines. Inflammation lingers longer. Responses become slower or misdirected. This is not because the immune system forgets how to work. It is because perfect regulation is expensive, and its benefits diminish once reproductive success is already achieved. Similar patterns appear in hormonal balance, cardiovascular resilience, and cellular repair. None of these systems collapse entirely. They continue operating at a reduced level, sufficient to sustain life, but not optimized to preserve peak function. In early environments, this level of function was enough. External forces often intervened before internal decline became decisive. Modern conditions remove many of those external limits, exposing the body's long-term compromises. People live long enough to experience the cumulative effects of reduced precision. Small inefficiencies that once went unnoticed now shape daily experience. Fatigue lasts longer. Recovery requires more time. The body becomes less forgiving of stress. These changes can feel abrupt, but they are the result of slow shifts that began long before they were felt. The body has been adjusting its level of investment quietly for years. What changes is not the process itself, but the context in which it unfolds. Medicine and stability allow life to continue deep into a phase biology never needed to refine. This creates a strange contrast. Life is safer than ever, yet the body feels more fragile. The contradiction is only apparent. Safety extends time. It does not redesign maintenance. The human organism carries forward an ancient balance between cost and benefit, one that favored early success over long endurance. When people sense that their bodies are no longer fully supporting them, they are encountering this balance directly. The body has not turned against them. It is simply operating within limits that were never meant to be tested for so long. Recognizing this can soften the fear that often accompanies aging. Decline is not a sudden loss of order. It is the gradual exposure of a structure built for different conditions. Life persists not because maintenance is perfect, but because it is adequate. The feeling that the body is slowly letting go reflects the truth that evolution has already done so. Over time, the reduction in maintenance reshapes not only the body, but the way life is experienced from within it. As systems lose reserve capacity, the margin between effort and exhaustion narrows. Actions that once required little thought now demand planning and recovery. This change is often described as weakness, but it is more precisely a shift in tolerance. The body still functions, but it no longer absorbs strain as easily. This altered relationship with effort subtly transforms daily life. Movement becomes more deliberate. Risks are weighed more carefully. The pace of existence slows, not by choice, but by necessity. In early human contexts, this slowing often coincided with withdrawal from physically demanding roles. The group adapted around it. Younger members carried the load. Older individuals remained present, but less central. This transition was gradual and largely unremarkable because it aligned with the body's changing capacity. In modern settings, the same transition can feel disruptive. Roles and expectations often persist beyond the point where the body can comfortably meet them. The internal experience of decline becomes more pronounced because it is no longer mirrored by immediate changes in social structure. This mismatch amplifies the sense that something essential is slipping away. The body's reduced willingness to repair and adapt creates a continuous background signal of vulnerability. Small stresses accumulate, minor illnesses linger. The sense of robustness that once defined the body fades. This fading is not dramatic, but it is persistent. It can lead to a quiet awareness that life is now being sustained rather than built. The future feels narrower, not because of conscious fear, but because the body itself signals limits more clearly. These signals were always part of the design, but they rarely dominated experience in ancestral environments where external forces often intervened first. Modern longevity allows these internal signals to shape consciousness directly. The feeling that life is winding down before it ends emerges from this prolonged exposure. It is not merely a thought, it is a bodily perception. The organism senses that its systems are no longer being reinforced with the same intensity. Evolutionary support has thinned. What remains is persistence without priority. This state can be misunderstood as failure or loss of worth. But from a biological perspective, it is the expected outcome of completed investment. The body has fulfilled its primary obligations. It continues operating but without the same internal incentives to renew itself aggressively. Understanding this helps separate biological reality from personal judgment. The gradual withdrawal of maintenance is not a verdict on the value of a life. It is a reflection of a design focused on early success rather than long endurance. The discomfort that arises from this withdrawal is real, but it is not evidence of something having gone wrong. It is the sensation of living inside a system that has reached the limits of what it was built to support. Life continues, but it does so in a quieter mode, where effort yields less return and time stretches differently. This is the space where many people begin to feel that their lives are approaching an end, even when many years remain. Not because death is imminent, but because the body has already begun to loosen its hold. Aging is often imagined as an active force, something that arrives with intent and steadily dismantles the body. But this image is misleading. There is no biological program whose purpose is to make humans old. What exists instead is absence. Aging unfolds not because the body is instructed to decline, but because nothing instructs it to continue investing at the same level. The distinction matters. An active process implies direction and design. A passive process implies neglect once attention is no longer required. Human aging belongs to the second category. The body does not turn against itself. It simply stops being strongly supported by evolutionary priorities. In early life, countless mechanisms operate to prevent failure. DNA repair systems work tirelessly. Cells that malfunction are removed quickly. Hormonal signals coordinate growth, energy use, and recovery with remarkable precision. These systems are expensive. They consume energy and require complex regulation. They are maintained because failure during early life threatens reproduction and offspring survival. Later, the cost-benefit balance changes. Preventing every small error no longer offers a meaningful advantage to genetic continuation. As a result, the body allows more variation. Cells with minor defects persist longer. Repair is slower and less exact. The accumulation of these tolerated imperfections creates the experience we call aging. It is not an attack. It is a relaxation of standards. This explains why aging looks different from disease. Diseases often follow specific pathways and produce identifiable disruptions. Aging spreads diffusely across systems. It manifests as general loss of resilience rather than targeted breakdown. The body continues to function, but with wider margins for error. In ancestral environments, these wider margins rarely dominated experience. External dangers often ended life before internal imperfections accumulated significantly. Because of this, natural selection never refined mechanisms to prevent late-life decline. There was no consistent pressure to do so. Modern life removes many external threats, allowing the passive nature of aging to become fully visible. People live long enough to experience the consequences of biological indifference. This indifference can feel deeply unsettling. It lacks drama, yet it shapes everything. Effort produces less improvement. Recovery stalls. Small declines do not reverse easily. The body does not fail catastrophically. It simply stops correcting itself as aggressively as it once did. Understanding aging as passive helps clarify why no single intervention can halt it completely. Treating individual problems does not restore the lost investment. Medicine can patch specific issues, but it cannot recreate the evolutionary pressure that once justified intense maintenance. The underlying logic remains unchanged. The body continues because stopping immediately offered no advantage, but it does not strive to preserve itself indefinitely. This quiet withdrawal of effort produces the sense that life is slowly unwinding, not because something is actively pulling it apart, but because nothing is holding it together with the same force. People often interpret this as loss of control or meaning, but it is more accurately a shift in biological context. The phase of active building has ended. What follows is persistence without instruction. Aging, then, is not an enemy to be fought. It is the space left behind when purpose-driven maintenance recedes. Recognizing this does not remove its effects, but it changes how they are understood. Decline is not imposed. It is permitted. And that permission was written into human biology long before modern humans began to ask why life seems to end before death arrives. Because aging is passive, it does not announce itself clearly. It advances through accumulation rather than event. Each tolerated imperfection is small enough to be ignored, but together they alter the body's baseline. Cells divide with slightly more error. Proteins fold less reliably. Waste products linger longer before removal. None of these changes alone threaten survival. They simply reduce precision. Over time, reduced precision becomes reduced capacity. The body still responds, but its responses are slower and less coordinated. This is why aging rarely feels dramatic in its early stages. It feels like a series of minor adjustments that never quite return to baseline. In early life, the body is resilient because it is overbuilt for its tasks. It has reserves. Damage is corrected quickly, and systems compensate for one another. As maintenance relaxes, those reserves shrink. Compensation still occurs, but it draws from a smaller pool. Eventually, compensation itself becomes costly. The body chooses tolerance over correction. This choice is not conscious. It is the default state once strong selective pressure is gone. In ancestral environments, this state was temporary. Life rarely extended far enough for cumulative tolerance to dominate experience. Modern life changes that. People live long enough to inhabit the consequences of tolerated imperfection. This creates a new kind of awareness. The body becomes less predictable. Energy fluctuates without clear cause. Recovery varies from day to day. The sense of continuity that once defined physical experience weakens. This unpredictability is often interpreted as instability or fragility, but it is more accurately described as loosened regulation. The systems that once enforced consistency are no longer operating at full strength. This loosened regulation also affects perception of time. When the body recovers quickly, time feels compressed. Effort leads smoothly to result. When recovery slows, time stretches. Actions require more spacing. Days feel longer, not because there is more to do, but because less can be done without cost. This shift subtly changes how life is organized. Plans become shorter. Commitments are weighed against energy rather than ambition. The future feels closer, not because it has shrunk, but because the body signals limits more clearly. These signals are not warnings of imminent failure. They are indicators of reduced investment. The body is conserving, not collapsing. It is no longer built to expand its capacities. It is built to persist within narrower bounds. This persistence can feel unsatisfying because it lacks the upward momentum of earlier life. Growth is replaced by maintenance. Maintenance is replaced by management. Each step feels like a narrowing of possibility. From a biological standpoint, this narrowing is expected. The body has already delivered what evolution required. Anything beyond that exists outside the original mandate. The feeling that life is slowly losing intensity reflects this shift. Sensations dull slightly. Effort costs more. Rewards feel less immediate. None of this means life has ended. It means life is no longer being actively reinforced by the forces that shaped the body. This distinction is important. Aging is not decay imposed from outside. It is the exposure of a system whose primary work is already complete. The accumulation of tolerated imperfections reveals the limits of a design optimized for early success. Understanding this can reduce the sense of betrayal many people feel toward their bodies. The body has not changed its rules unexpectedly. It is following them precisely. What has changed is the context. Humans now live long enough to feel the full weight of passive aging. They live inside the aftermath of purpose, where the body continues without instruction and time continues without urgency. In this space, the question is no longer how to stop aging, but how to live within a body that is no longer striving to renew itself. As passive aging continues, its effects move beyond the physical and begin to shape how life is internally organized. When the body no longer restores itself efficiently, choices narrow without being consciously chosen. Energy becomes a limiting factor that quietly governs attention, social engagement, and risk. This shift is subtle. It does not announce itself as decline, but as preference. People begin to favor familiarity over novelty, predictability over expansion. This is often interpreted as psychological change, but it is rooted in biology. The body signals that excess effort carries higher cost, and the mind adapts accordingly. In early life, the body invites exploration. It absorbs mistakes and recovers quickly, allowing learning through trial and error. Later, recovery slows, and the same mistakes linger. The nervous system responds by reducing exposure. Life becomes more carefully contained. This containment is not fear-driven. It is efficiency-driven. The organism is conserving what remains of its capacity. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. There is no advantage in risking limited reserves once the primary work is done. What changes, however, is the subjective experience of time and meaning. When effort no longer leads to growth, ambition loses its natural reward. Goals that once felt compelling now feel heavy. This can produce a sense that life is closing rather than opening, not because opportunity has vanished, but because the body no longer supports expansion in the same way. Passive aging thus reshapes motivation. Desire does not disappear, but it loses urgency. Curiosity remains, but it competes with fatigue. Engagement continues, but it is more selective. This selectivity can feel like withdrawal, but it is more accurately an adaptation to reduced tolerance. The organism is aligning its behavior with its changing internal conditions. In ancestral environments, this adaptation had little consequence. Life rarely extended long enough for long-term disengagement to dominate experience. In modern contexts, disengagement can stretch across many years. This prolonged adjustment can feel like a quiet ending. People remain alive, connected, and aware, yet something essential feels completed. The drive that once organized days and ambitions no longer presses forward. Biology has released its grip. What remains is consciousness navigating time without the guidance of evolutionary urgency. This state is often misunderstood as loss of purpose, but it is more precisely the absence of automatic purpose. Earlier in life, purpose emerged naturally from necessity. Later, necessity fades, and purpose must be created deliberately or not at all. The body does not resist either outcome. It simply continues at a reduced level of investment. This neutrality can be unsettling. Humans are accustomed to being driven from within. When that drive softens, the absence is felt more strongly than any presence. The sense that life is winding down before it ends arises from this prolonged neutrality, not because life lacks value, but because its original engine has been turned off. Passive aging does not destroy life. It changes its texture. It shifts existence from forward motion to sustained presence. For some, this shift opens space for reflection and depth. For others, it feels like stagnation. Biology does not distinguish between these interpretations. It has already completed its task. The question that remains is not how to restore the old momentum, but how to inhabit a phase of life that was never meant to propel itself forward. In this way, passive aging reveals a central truth of human existence. Life does not end when the body fails. It begins to end when the body stops insisting on continuation. Everything that follows exists in a quieter register, where time persists without demand and meaning must come from somewhere other than biology itself. In early human groups, survival depended not only on strength and reproduction, but on memory. Knowledge about landscapes, seasons, animals, plants, and social alliances could mean the difference between continuity and collapse. Long before writing existed, information lived inside people. This created a secondary role for those who had lived long enough to accumulate experience. When physical contribution declined, memory sometimes remained valuable. Older individuals could recall migration routes, past droughts, dangerous patterns, and successful strategies. In small groups with limited population, this knowledge could not be easily replaced. Under these conditions, extended life acquired a conditional usefulness. Not because the body remained strong, but because the mind carried something rare. This usefulness, however, was fragile. It depended entirely on context. In environments where conditions changed rapidly, or where groups were large enough to absorb loss, the value of accumulated memory diminished. Evolution did not guarantee a role for older humans. It merely allowed one to emerge when circumstances made it advantageous. This distinction is important. The preservation of older individuals was never a primary goal. It was an occasional side effect of the usefulness of information. When memory mattered, survival could extend slightly beyond physical peak. When it did not, there was little reason for continued investment. This explains why the role of older humans varied widely across early societies. Some were respected as repositories of knowledge, others faded quietly from relevance. Biology did not enforce either outcome. It only provided the capacity for memory to persist longer than physical strength. This capacity offered a narrow extension of purpose, but it was never guaranteed or universal. As societies became more complex, the value of individual memory shifted again. Oral knowledge was gradually supplemented and then replaced by external storage. Tools, traditions, and later written records reduced reliance on any single person's experience. The biological advantage of preserving long-lived individuals weakened further. The body did not adapt to compensate. It continued to withdraw maintenance as before. What changed was the context. Older humans could remain alive longer, but the evolutionary justification for doing so grew thinner. This transition marks an important point in understanding why many modern lives feel as though they end after purpose fades. The secondary purpose of memory was never designed to support long extensions of life. It functioned only when conditions demanded it. When conditions no longer did, extended existence lost even this limited biological grounding. What remained was life sustained by safety rather than necessity. The body persisted, but without a role clearly anchored in survival. Memory endured, but its value was no longer structurally required. This created a new kind of silence. The individual remained conscious and aware, yet no longer occupied a position that the group could not function without. In early environments, this silence was often brief. In modern environments, it can last decades. Understanding this helps clarify why extended life after physical and reproductive contribution can feel strangely hollow. The secondary purpose that once justified survival beyond peak strength was never meant to last long. When it fades, nothing automatic takes its place. Biology provided memory as a temporary bridge, not a permanent destination. As memory became the primary contribution of older individuals, its limitations also became clear. Memory is not a fixed resource. It decays, distorts, and depends on relevance. In early human groups, what an elder remembered mattered only if it could be applied directly to present conditions. Knowledge of a migration route was useful only if the landscape remained stable. Lessons from past conflicts mattered only if social patterns repeated. When environments changed slowly, accumulated memory retained value. When change accelerated, memory lost precision. Evolution did not protect memory indefinitely, because indefinite accuracy offered little advantage once reproduction and physical contribution had ended. The same reduction in maintenance that affected the body also affected the mind. Neural systems remained functional, but they were not preserved at peak clarity. This is why memory aging appears uneven. Some forms of knowledge persist while others fade. Practical, emotionally reinforced memories often remain longer. Abstract or unused information dissolves more quickly. The brain, like the body, tolerates imperfection once strong selective pressure is gone. In early contexts, this tolerance rarely mattered for long. Older individuals either remained useful through applicable knowledge or gradually lost relevance. There was no prolonged period in which memory existed without consequence. Modern life alters this balance. People now live long enough to experience the gradual loosening of cognitive precision directly. Memory continues, but its reliability varies. Experience accumulates, but its authority weakens in rapidly changing environments. Skills learned decades earlier may no longer apply. This shift can be deeply unsettling. The one function that once extended purpose beyond physical decline begins to lose its grounding. The individual remains mentally present, yet increasingly disconnected from the structures that once gave memory value. This does not mean memory disappears. It means its social function erodes. Knowledge becomes personal rather than essential. In early human groups, this erosion often coincided with death, because survival depended on immediate relevance. In modern societies, safety allows this erosion to unfold slowly. Life extends into a period where memory exists without necessity. The mind still recalls, reflects, and understands, but fewer situations demand what it holds. This creates a unique form of emptiness. The person has lived, learned, and remembered, yet the world no longer requires those memories to function. Biology did not prepare a response to this condition. The brain was built to store information long enough to be useful, not long enough to persist without purpose. When usefulness fades, maintenance loosens. Attention drifts. Recall becomes less sharp. These changes are not failures of character or effort. They are expressions of a system that was never designed for prolonged cognitive relevance. Understanding this helps explain why later life can feel intellectually quieter even when intelligence remains. The secondary purpose of memory was always conditional. Once conditions shift, its biological support thins. What remains is consciousness carrying experience without a clear destination. The mind continues, but the role it once served has quietly dissolved, leaving life extended beyond both physical and cognitive necessity. As the secondary role of memory weakens, what remains is a form of presence without structural demand. The individual is still there, still aware, still capable of thought and feeling, but no longer required in the way earlier life demanded. This state is unfamiliar to human biology. For most of evolutionary history, being alive meant being needed. Existence and necessity overlapped closely. When one faded, the other often followed soon after. Modern conditions have separated them. Safety allows life to continue, even when necessity has dissolved. The result is a prolonged phase where the individual exists without a role clearly anchored in survival. Biology offers no guidance for this phase. It neither resists it nor supports it strongly. The body continues its slow withdrawal of maintenance. The mind continues its gradual loosening of focus. What disappears is not consciousness, but direction. This absence can be deeply unsettling because it lacks a clear cause. There is no injury, no crisis, no single loss to explain it. The feeling emerges quietly, as a sense that life has become observational rather than participatory. The individual watches time pass, rather than being pulled forward by it. In early human contexts, this state rarely lasted. Environmental pressure, illness, or injury often closed the gap quickly. In modern life, the gap can stretch for years or decades. During this time, people may feel invisible rather than absent. They remain part of the world, but the world does not organize itself around their contribution. This invisibility is not imposed deliberately. It arises naturally when survival no longer depends on the individual's presence. Memory, once a bridge between generations, becomes personal reflection. Experience, once essential, becomes optional. Biology does not intervene to restore relevance. It has already fulfilled its mandate. This helps explain why many people describe later life as feeling complete rather than ongoing. Not complete in the sense of satisfaction, but complete in the sense that the main structure has already been built. What follows feels like living inside the aftermath. The core work has been done, the scaffolding remains, but construction has ended. This perception is not a failure of imagination or will. It is the experience of living beyond biological design. Human beings evolved to solve urgent problems and then disappear. Modern humans solve those problems and then remain. The body does not object. The mind adapts quietly. But neither provides a new automatic reason to continue. That reason must come from somewhere else, or not at all. The secondary purpose of memory was never meant to carry this weight alone. When it fades, the individual enters a phase where existence persists without biological justification. This does not mean life lacks value. It means value is no longer generated by necessity. The quiet ending many people sense long before death is not a premonition. It is the recognition that the roles that once defined life have already been fulfilled. What remains is time without instruction. How that time is experienced depends not on evolution, but on what is placed into the space it leaves behind. As human societies expanded beyond small groups, the relationship between individual purpose and biological design shifted again. Larger populations reduced dependence on any single person. Redundancy increased. Skills could be distributed across many individuals rather than concentrated in a few. This change weakened the link between survival and individual contribution. In early groups, losing one experienced person could threaten continuity. In larger societies, loss became absorbable. Biology did not adjust to this new scale. The body and mind continued to operate according to an ancient logic that assumed necessity would be immediate and personal. Instead, modern social structures created distance between contribution and survival. An individual could remain alive without being critical to the group's functioning. This marked a profound change in how life was experienced. Purpose became less tightly coupled to biological roles. Work, status, and identity became mediated by institutions rather than direct necessity. For a time, these structures provided replacement roles. People found meaning through labor, hierarchy, and social recognition. But these roles were cultural, not biological. They depended on external validation rather than internal urgency. When participation in these structures ended or diminished, nothing within the body compensated. The biological engine had already stepped back. The social engine followed later. This sequence matters. Biology withdraws first, society withdraws second. What remains is the individual, still alive, but no longer required by either system. In early human history, this alignment rarely broke down. Biological decline and social disappearance occurred close together. Modern life separates them. People can outlive their social roles by many years. This creates a new experience, one that evolution never prepared for. The individual remains physically present but structurally unnecessary. This is not the result of neglect or cruelty. It is a consequence of scale. Large societies do not depend on particular bodies. They depend on systems. Once systems replace individuals, biological purpose becomes even less relevant to survival. The body continues to age passively. The mind continues to reflect. But the sense of being needed fades. This fading is often misinterpreted as personal failure or loss of worth. In reality, it reflects a structural shift. Purpose has been externalized. When external structures no longer require participation, nothing internal rises to replace that demand. The human organism was not designed for prolonged existence without necessity. It was designed to solve problems and then disappear. Modern societies interrupt the disappearance but do not restore the necessity. As a result, many people experience later life as a long interval of quiet detachment. They are present but peripheral, active but not essential. This condition is historically new. It did not exist for most of human evolution. Understanding this helps explain why extended life in large societies often feels hollow despite material security. The body persists. Society functions, but the individual no longer occupies a position that either system requires. What remains is time sustained by structures that do not ask anything back. This is the beginning of a new kind of ending, not one imposed by death, but one created by the separation of life from necessity. Modern social systems did not become complex all at once. They expanded gradually, layering structure upon structure until individual presence mattered less to overall function. Institutions learned how to preserve continuity without relying on specific people. Tasks were divided, procedures documented, and roles standardized. One person could step away, and another could take their place with minimal disruption. This transformation strengthened societies, but it quietly altered the human experience of purpose. Survival no longer depended on particular bodies. It depended on systems that could absorb loss without collapsing. For most of human evolution, contribution was immediate and visible. Effort translated directly into survival. When someone hunted, gathered, defended, or taught, the effect was felt by the group right away. In large societies, that clarity dissolves. Contribution becomes indirect. Impact spreads across layers of organization. The individual participates, but rarely feels essential. Biology does not interpret interchangeability as meaning. The human organism evolved to respond to direct consequence, not abstract continuity. When consequence becomes distant, internal urgency weakens. During active participation in work and social roles, this weakening is often hidden. External schedules, expectations, and obligations provide momentum. The body follows routines even as its internal drive has already softened. But when participation slows or ends, the absence becomes noticeable. Retirement, reduced responsibility, or social withdrawal often reveal how little intrinsic structure remains once external demands are removed. The body has already reduced its investment. The mind no longer receives clear signals about necessity. What remains is time without pressure. This condition is frequently described as freedom, but freedom without direction can feel disorienting. Evolution did not prepare humans to organize long stretches of time without constraint. Constraint was always present, either through survival threats or through social necessity. Modern systems remove both gradually. People can remain alive, supported by infrastructure that does not require their continued contribution. This support preserves life, but it does not engage the ancient mechanisms that once generated meaning through effort. The result is a prolonged state of suspension. Life is neither demanding nor dangerous, yet it lacks the pull that once shaped days and decisions. The sense that life has ended before death often emerges here, not because suffering has arrived, but because necessity has departed. The roles that once defined existence dissolve, and nothing internal replaces them. The individual remains conscious, capable, and often comfortable, yet no longer required by either biology or society. This experience is historically new. It arises from the combination of passive aging and systemic organization. Biology steps back first. Social systems take over. When those systems no longer require participation, life continues without demand. The human organism was never shaped to flourish in this condition. It can endure it, but it does not automatically generate purpose within it. Understanding this helps explain the quiet cost of modern longevity. Security replaces urgency. Continuity replaces contribution. The body persists, but the feeling of being essential fades. This fading is not caused by personal weakness or failure. It is the natural outcome of living within structures designed to function without individuals. Life continues, but it does so in a reduced register, where existence is supported rather than needed, and time moves forward without asking anything in return. The separation between being alive and being needed becomes most visible when social roles finally fall away. Work ends. Responsibilities narrow. Public recognition fades. What remains is the individual, still conscious, still present, but no longer anchored to any structure that depends on them. In earlier human environments, this moment rarely stretched across long periods. Physical decline and social disappearance happened close together. When strength faded and memory lost relevance, survival often ended soon after. Modern societies interrupt this sequence. They preserve life long after roles dissolve. This interruption creates a condition that human biology never had to solve. The individual remains, but the surrounding world no longer organizes itself around their contribution. This absence is not dramatic. It does not arrive with conflict or crisis. It arrives quietly, as a thinning of relevance. Conversations continue. Days pass. Needs are met. Yet nothing essential depends on the person's presence. The experience can feel like standing just outside the flow of life rather than inside it. Biology offers no corrective mechanism for this state. The body continues its slow withdrawal of maintenance. The mind remains capable of reflection, but reflection alone does not generate necessity. What once provided structure has already ended. Society no longer requires participation. Biology no longer insists on expansion. This leaves the individual suspended between continuation and conclusion. The feeling that life has already ended in some essential way often emerges here, not because existence has stopped, but because its organizing forces have disappeared. The person is still alive, but life is no longer oriented around them. This can be misinterpreted as loss of worth or dignity. In reality, it is the result of structural changes that remove dependence on individuals. Large systems do not need particular people to function. They need processes. Once a person steps out of those processes, nothing inside the system calls them back. The body does not respond with renewed urgency. The mind does not receive new automatic goals. Time continues, but without demand. This is a historically new form of existence. It did not shape human biology because it did not exist long enough to exert pressure. Humans evolved to solve urgent problems and then disappear. Modern humans solve those problems and then remain. The body tolerates this. Consciousness adapts to it, but neither was designed to thrive within it. The result is a prolonged period of quiet detachment. Life feels complete not because it is fulfilled, but because its primary structures are already in place. Nothing more is required. This sense of completion can feel peaceful to some and empty to others. Biology does not distinguish between these interpretations. It has already finished its work. The systems that once generated urgency have shut down. What remains is presence without necessity. Understanding this helps clarify why extended life in modern societies often carries a subtle weight. The weight is not suffering. It is the absence of being needed. Survival no longer demands participation. Society no longer requires contribution. The individual remains, but the forces that once shaped existence have withdrawn. This creates a quiet ending that precedes death. Not an ending marked by loss, but by stillness. Life continues, but it no longer asks anything of the person living it. Time moves forward without resistance, and meaning, if it appears at all, must come from sources that biology and society no longer provide automatically. Human life was never designed to unfold evenly across long stretches of time. For most of our history, time itself was compressed by necessity. Days were shaped by survival. Seasons mattered more than years. The future rarely extended far beyond immediate needs. Under these conditions, meaning and time were tightly bound together. What mattered was what needed to be done next. Purpose emerged naturally because time was scarce and demand was constant. When survival pressures eased, time expanded. Modern humans now inhabit long periods with few urgent demands. This expansion of time has created a mismatch between how life is lived and how it is biologically structured. The body and mind evolved to operate within short horizons of necessity, not within decades of open-ended existence. When time stretches without corresponding purpose, it begins to feel heavy rather than abundant. This sensation is not psychological weakness. It is the experience of living in a temporal environment the human organism was never designed to navigate alone. In earlier contexts, time was shaped by action. Movement, labor, and risk broke days into meaningful segments. When those forces receded, time lost its structure. Modern life offers comfort and safety, but it does not automatically supply urgency. Without urgency, time becomes visible. Hours lengthen, days blur. The future feels less like a path and more like an expanse. This shift profoundly alters the human experience. People often describe later life as slower, but slowness is not the core issue. The deeper change is that time is no longer directed. It does not pull forward, it waits. Biology does not generate a response to this condition. The body continues to function within its reduced investment mode. The mind remains capable of thought and memory, but neither provides a natural framework for organizing extended time without demand. This is why the absence of purpose often feels more distressing than physical decline. The body signals limits, but the mind confronts openness without instruction. In early human life, openness rarely existed. Constraint defined experience. Modern humans face a different challenge. They must inhabit long spans of time that are biologically quiet. This quiet can feel peaceful or empty depending on context, but it always represents a departure from ancestral conditions. The mismatch between expanded time and reduced biological urgency creates a subtle tension. Life continues, but its rhythm no longer aligns with the internal systems that once structured it. The result is a feeling that time is passing without accumulation. Years add up, but they do not build towards something clearly defined. This perception often underlies the sense that life has already ended in some essential way, even as the body persists. Understanding this mismatch clarifies why extended life can feel paradoxical. More time does not automatically produce more meaning. Meaning once arose from necessity, not duration. When necessity fades and time expands, the human experience enters unfamiliar territory. The organism continues, but without a clear temporal anchor. Life becomes something to be endured rather than driven. This does not imply failure or loss of value. It reflects a structural condition created by survival, outlasting design. The human body and mind were shaped for a world where time pressed in. Modern life removes that pressure, leaving individuals to face time in its raw form. How that time is experienced depends not on evolution, but on what fills the space necessity once occupied. When time expands without pressure, it begins to behave differently in the mind. It stops acting like a resource and starts feeling like a medium that must be endured. In earlier stages of life, time is shaped by anticipation. There is always something ahead that requires preparation. Learning, building, advancing, protecting. These forces compress time by filling it with expectation. Later, when those forces weaken, anticipation thins. The future remains, but it no longer carries weight. Days arrive without requiring transformation. They pass without demanding decision. This alters the inner experience of living more profoundly than physical aging alone. The body signals reduced urgency, and the mind follows. Without clear milestones ahead, time loses direction. It does not move towards something, it accumulates. This accumulation can feel like stagnation, even when life remains stable and safe. Biology offers no mechanism to restore direction once urgency fades. The systems that once synchronized effort with outcome no longer operate at full strength. The mind continues to think, but thinking without demand circles inward. Memory becomes more prominent than planning. Reflection replaces projection. This shift is not inherently negative, but it changes the texture of existence. Life becomes less about becoming and more about remaining. For organisms shaped by survival pressure, this is unfamiliar territory. In ancestral environments, remaining without purpose rarely lasted long. External conditions intervened. Modern conditions allow this state to persist. As a result, people may experience time as something that must be filled rather than followed. Activities lose their sense of progression. Events no longer build upon one another. The future feels repetitive rather than open. This is often interpreted as boredom, but boredom is only the surface expression. Beneath it lies a deeper mismatch between how time is structured externally and how the human organism evolved to experience it. The brain expects urgency to shape perception. When urgency is absent, perception flattens. Moments lose contrast. Days resemble one another. This flattening can feel like a quiet ending, not because life has stopped, but because it no longer differentiates itself. The passing of time ceases to mark change. It simply marks duration. Understanding this helps explain why extended life can feel less vivid even when health remains relatively stable. The reduction in biological drive affects not only action, but perception itself. Without strong signals to prioritize, the mind treats experiences as interchangeable. Time becomes homogeneous. This homogeneity is not a failure of imagination or will. It is the result of living beyond the conditions that once structured experience. The sense that life is already complete often arises here, not because nothing remains possible, but because the organism no longer experiences possibility as urgent. Time continues, but it no longer asks to be used. It waits. For some, this waiting is peaceful. For others, it is unsettling. Biology does not choose between these interpretations. It simply allows time to unfold without instruction. The human experience in this phase depends on what replaces necessity as the organizing force. Without replacement, time expands without shape. Life persists, but it no longer feels directed. This is one of the quiet costs of longevity. Survival has been extended, but the internal architecture for inhabiting extended time has not been redesigned. What remains is consciousness moving through long durations without the pressure that once gave each moment weight. When time loses direction, the human sense of self begins to change as well. Identity, for most of life, is shaped by movement. People know who they are by what they are becoming, what they are responsible for, and what still lies ahead. These forward references anchor the self in time. When they fade, identity becomes less anchored. The person remains the same in memory, but less clearly defined in the present. This shift can feel like disappearance, even while consciousness remains intact. The self is no longer pulled forward by obligation or expectation. It drifts within an expanded present. In earlier human contexts, this drift was brief. Life rarely extended long enough beyond necessity for identity to dissolve in this way. Modern longevity makes the drift visible and prolonged. People may feel that they are still here, yet no longer clearly someone in the way they once were. This is not confusion. It is the natural outcome of time continuing without role. The body signals reduced urgency. The mind responds by loosening its grip on future-oriented identity. What remains is awareness without trajectory. This state can feel peaceful or unsettling depending on interpretation, but it always represents a departure from the conditions that shaped human psychology. Identity evolved to be dynamic because survival required constant adjustment. When adjustment is no longer demanded, identity stabilizes and then softens. The edges blur. Days are not organized around becoming, so the sense of self stops updating. Life feels finished not because it is over, but because it is no longer being rewritten. The story has stopped adding chapters, even though pages continue to turn. This perception often underlies the feeling that life has already ended in some essential way. The body continues, memory remains, but the narrative momentum that once defined existence has slowed to stillness. Biology does not intervene to restart it. Evolution never needed to support identity beyond the period of active contribution. When that period ends, the mechanisms that refreshed purpose and selfhood withdraw as well. Modern humans are left to inhabit a long stretch of time where identity is no longer reinforced by necessity. This is not a failure of adaptation, it is the exposure of a limit. The human organism was designed to move through time with pressure, not to remain within it indefinitely. When pressure disappears, the self becomes quieter. Understanding this helps explain why extended life often feels like living after the end of the story, not because the story was tragic, but because it reached its natural conclusion earlier than the body did. What follows is an epilogue written in time rather than action. Whether that epilogue feels empty or spacious depends on what replaces the forces that once structured identity. Biology does not supply that replacement. It simply allows awareness to persist. Time continues without direction, and the self adapts by becoming less defined. This is the final shape of the mismatch between longevity and design. Life lasts longer than the narrative that once gave it form. The individual remains, but the story no longer advances. Presence replaces progression. Existence continues, but it does so without insisting on becoming anything more. The body does not shut itself down when purpose fades. It keeps going. Organs continue their routines. Systems maintain a minimum balance. Breathing, circulation, digestion, and repair persist even as their intensity declines. This persistence creates a paradox. Life continues biologically even after the reasons that once justified strong maintenance have disappeared. From the outside, this looks like resilience. From the inside, it often feels like inertia. The body remains alive not because it is striving, but because stopping immediately would have offered no evolutionary advantage. Persistence costs less than redesign. Once the machinery exists, allowing it to run down slowly is cheaper than building a clear endpoint. Evolution favored continuation without intention. This is why the human body can outlast its own priorities. In early human environments, this paradox rarely became visible. External dangers ended life close to the point where biological investment declined. Modern conditions remove those dangers, revealing a body that continues without guidance. The systems that once worked in concert now operate independently. Each maintains itself just enough to avoid collapse. There is no coordinating signal that says why continuation matters. The body does not ask whether it should keep going. It simply does. This creates a distinct experience in later life. Effort feels optional rather than necessary. Recovery feels incomplete but sufficient. The organism exists in a state of biological neutrality. It is not being pushed forward, and it is not being pulled back. It drifts. This drifting can feel confusing because earlier life was defined by pressure. Needs demanded action. Consequences followed quickly. Later, the absence of pressure removes feedback. Actions no longer feel consequential in the same way. Time passes without requiring response. The body adapts by lowering expectations. It conserves rather than expands. This conservation keeps life going, but it does not restore purpose. Medicine can extend this state significantly. It can correct specific failures and stabilize systems. What it cannot do is recreate the evolutionary logic that once made maintenance urgent. Treating the body does not restore its original mandate. The result is extended biological continuation without corresponding meaning. People often sense this gap intuitively. They feel alive but not driven. They notice that survival itself no longer feels like an achievement. It feels like something that happens automatically. This perception is not ingratitude. It is recognition. The body is operating on momentum rather than mission. Understanding this helps clarify why many lives feel as though they end long before death. Death marks the cessation of function. Purpose ends earlier, when function no longer serves continuation. What follows is time lived inside a body that persists without instruction. This persistence is neither cruel nor generous. It is simply efficient. Evolution did not design an ending. It designed a threshold beyond which attention fades. Modern humans now live far beyond that threshold. The body keeps going, because nothing tells it not to, but nothing tells it why either. This is the quiet condition that defines late life in a world where survival has been secured. Life continues, but it no longer insists on itself. This continued existence without direction reshapes how the body relates to risk, effort, and repair. When survival no longer depends on constant engagement, the organism shifts toward preservation rather than performance. Systems aim to avoid collapse, not to improve. This is why later life often feels governed by thresholds. Activities are weighed against tolerance. Stress is managed carefully. Recovery is planned rather than assumed. The body becomes conservative, not because it fears death, but because it no longer receives signals that justify expenditure. In early life, effort is rewarded with growth. In later life, effort is measured against cost. This change alters the meaning of action itself. Doing less is not laziness. It is alignment with reduced investment. The organism is optimizing for endurance within narrower limits. In ancestral environments, this strategy rarely unfolded over long periods. External threats often intervened before conservation became dominant. Modern safety allows conservation to define daily life. People live inside bodies that are no longer designed to be challenged repeatedly. The result is a careful existence, one that prioritizes stability over expansion. This carefulness can be misread as withdrawal or disengagement. In reality, it is the body responding accurately to its internal state. Repair mechanisms are slower and less precise. Overextension carries higher risk. The organism adapts by narrowing its range. This narrowing shapes experience subtly. Choices feel heavier, consequences linger longer, the future feels less flexible. None of this implies imminent failure. It implies a shift in operating mode. The body is no longer striving to extend its capabilities. It is maintaining coherence. This coherence allows life to continue, but it does not supply direction. Medical intervention can support coherence for a long time. It can stabilize systems, manage symptoms, and delay collapse. What it cannot do is reintroduce urgency. Urgency was never a feature of late life in evolutionary terms. Once the primary tasks were complete, urgency faded naturally. The modern extension of life stretches this urgency-free state far beyond its original duration. People often feel that they are living on borrowed time, but this metaphor is misleading. Nothing is being borrowed. The body is simply operating beyond its zone of strong support. It continues because continuation is mechanically easier than stopping. This continuation, however, lacks narrative force. The organism persists without striving. Actions occur, but they do not accumulate toward a larger outcome. This is why time can feel repetitive and flat. Days resemble one another because nothing internal demands differentiation. Understanding this helps clarify the quiet emotional tone of later life. It is not despair. It is neutrality. The body is neither fighting nor advancing. It is sustaining. This sustained state can be peaceful, but it can also feel empty. Biology does not choose between these experiences. It only provides the capacity to continue. The sense that life has already ended in some essential way arises when continuation replaces intention. The body keeps functioning, but the reasons that once organized its effort are gone. What remains is existence maintained by systems that no longer ask what they are maintaining it for. When biological continuation becomes the default state, the meaning of survival itself begins to change. Earlier in life, staying alive required effort. Hunger, danger, illness, and exposure demanded constant response. Survival was an achievement renewed each day. Later, survival becomes automatic. Systems maintain balance with minimal input. Life persists without asking much from the individual. This shift alters how existence is felt. Being alive no longer feels earned, it feels given. The body continues because it can, not because it must. This distinction is subtle, but powerful. When survival is no longer tied to action, action loses its urgency. The organism adapts by lowering its internal demands. It no longer pushes against limits. It avoids unnecessary strain. This avoidance is not resignation. It is alignment with a state where continuation is already secured. In early environments, this state was brief. Modern conditions allow it to stretch across many years. During this time, people often sense that life is happening to them rather than being shaped by them. Days pass without resistance. Decisions carry less consequence. The feedback loop between effort and outcome weakens. This weak feedback contributes to the feeling that life has already ended in some essential way, not because death is near, but because survival no longer feels meaningful. The body continues its routines. The mind remains aware, but the connection between being alive and doing something necessary has dissolved. This creates a unique form of stillness. Life is not dramatic. It is stable. Yet stability without direction can feel indistinguishable from conclusion. The organism has reached a plateau where nothing presses forward and nothing pulls back. Evolution never needed to address this plateau. It existed rarely and briefly in ancestral conditions. Now it has become common. People live long enough to inhabit a phase where survival is guaranteed but purpose is not. Biology offers no correction for this imbalance. It does not generate new imperatives once old ones are fulfilled. The body remains neutral. Consciousness adapts quietly. Some experience this as peace. Others experience it as emptiness. Both responses are understandable. Neither is dictated by biology. Biology has already completed its task. It built a system capable of continuation. It did not build a system for deciding what continuation should mean. The sense that life has already ended often arises here, in this prolonged neutrality. The ending is not physical, it is structural. The mechanisms that once organized existence have stopped asking for participation. Life continues, but without insistence. Time moves forward without resistance. Survival no longer feels like a victory. It feels like a condition. Understanding this helps explain why extended life can feel paradoxical. The body is alive, yet the experience of being alive feels muted. This is not a failure of gratitude or will. It is the natural outcome of living beyond the point where survival itself carried meaning. What follows is existence, sustained by momentum rather than purpose. A life that continues, not because it is needed, but because nothing tells it to stop. Modern medicine did not change why the human body exists. It changed how long it can continue. Antibiotics, surgery, sanitation, and chronic care removed many of the external forces that once ended life near the point where biological investment declined. Infection no longer determines survival as quickly. Injury is often repaired rather than fatal. Organ systems can be supported long after their natural reserves are exhausted. These interventions are remarkable achievements, but they operate on a specific level. They preserve function. They do not restore purpose. Medicine keeps the body working, but it does not reactivate the evolutionary logic that once made maintenance urgent. This distinction shapes the experience of late life in subtle ways. The body is stabilized, sometimes for decades, within a state that biology never designed to be permanent. Organs function, but often with assistance. Symptoms are managed rather than eliminated. Survival becomes a technical condition rather than a biological imperative. This creates a new layer of existence. Life is sustained externally, even as internal investment remains low. In early human history, this situation almost never occurred. When internal resilience declined, life usually ended soon after. Modern medicine separates these events. Decline no longer signals an approaching end. It signals eligibility for intervention. The body adapts to this support by conserving even more. Systems learn to operate at minimal levels because external correction fills the gaps. This further reduces internal urgency. The organism becomes dependent on stabilization rather than self-renewal. This dependence is not weakness. It is adaptation to a new environment. However, it deepens the separation between continuation and purpose. Survival becomes something managed rather than lived. People remain alive, monitored, treated, and maintained, but often without a sense that their presence is required by anything beyond the system itself. The medical system does not ask why life should continue. It asks how. As long as function can be preserved, continuation is assumed to be desirable. Biology offers no objection. It has already stepped back. The result is a prolonged phase of life where existence is technically supported but biologically neutral. This can feel reassuring and unsettling at the same time. Reassuring because danger is reduced. Unsettling because survival no longer feels earned or necessary. The body continues, but not because it is striving. It continues because it is being sustained. This shift changes how people relate to their own lives. Illness becomes a condition to manage rather than a signal of approaching closure. Time extends, but its meaning does not automatically expand with it. The sense that life has already ended often arises here, not from suffering but from the absence of necessity. Medicine can keep life going. It cannot tell life what it is going toward. This gap between extension and direction defines much of modern aging. The body persists within systems designed to prevent death, not to supply purpose. Survival becomes a default outcome rather than a meaningful achievement. Life continues, stabilized by intervention, even as the original reasons for being alive have already passed. Medical extension of life also changes how endings are perceived. In earlier human history, decline carried a clear signal. When strength failed and illness appeared, the end was often near. This clarity shaped how people related to time. There was a natural narrowing. Attention shifted. Roles dissolved quickly. Life closed in a recognizable way. Modern medicine disrupts this sequence. Decline no longer leads directly to conclusion. It leads to management. Symptoms are controlled. Functions are supported. Crises are postponed. The body can remain in a prolonged state of partial failure without crossing a clear threshold. This creates uncertainty rather than closure. People live inside conditions that would once have marked an ending. yet now persist indefinitely. This persistence alters the emotional structure of life. There is no clear moment when living becomes dying. The two overlap. Time stretches without resolution. The body continues, but its trajectory is unclear. This ambiguity can be more difficult than finality. Without a defined end, it becomes hard to organize meaning around remaining time. Biology offers no guidance here. The organism was not designed to navigate extended decline without conclusion. Its internal systems respond by conserving further, retreating into minimal function. Medicine compensates externally, keeping systems stable. Between these forces, life continues in a suspended state. People often describe this as feeling caught between living and ending. They are not actively dying, yet they are no longer fully living in the way earlier life demanded. This experience is not caused by fear alone. It is structural. The cues that once marked transition have been blurred. In ancestral contexts, the body and environment work together to signal when a life was nearing completion. Modern intervention separates these signals. The body declines slowly, the environment remains safe. Death is postponed, but the sense of conclusion is not replaced with a new form of purpose. This creates a prolonged waiting, not waiting for death exactly, but waiting for direction. Medicine excels at delaying outcomes. It does not create new ones. The question of why to continue is left unanswered. Survival is assumed to be good, but goodness alone does not organize experience. People may feel gratitude for extended time, yet also feel that the time lacks shape. Days continue, treatments repeat, routines stabilize. Life becomes cyclical rather than progressive. This cyclical quality reinforces the sense that the main arc has already ended. What remains feels like repetition without destination. Understanding this helps explain why modern longevity can feel emotionally heavier than shorter lives of the past. The weight is not pain, it is ambiguity. The body is kept alive, but the narrative that once guided life is no longer advancing. Medicine sustains existence, but it cannot restore the clarity that once came from living within a finite biological arc. The human organism is left to persist within extended uncertainty. Life continues, supported and protected, yet lacking the signals that once told it where it was going. The prolonged extension of life reshapes expectations in ways that are rarely spoken aloud. When death is postponed repeatedly, it stops functioning as a boundary and becomes a distant abstraction. Life is no longer framed by a clear arc with a recognizable end. Instead, it stretches outward, sustained by intervention, without offering a sense of completion. This alters how people relate to their own existence. Earlier in life, limits created urgency. Choices mattered because time was visibly finite. In extended later life, limits soften. Time feels open, yet directionless. Decisions lose weight because they no longer shape an approaching outcome. The future exists, but it does not demand preparation. Medicine supports this openness by preventing closure without providing orientation. The body continues to function within managed decline, and the mind adapts by lowering expectation. Hope becomes quieter, not because it is gone, but because it has nowhere clear to aim. This quietness can feel like resignation, but it is more accurately adjustment. The organism aligns itself with a reality where continuation is guaranteed but meaning is not supplied. The result is a subtle emotional flattening. Joy still appears, but it is often momentary rather than cumulative. Experiences no longer build towards something larger. They arrive and pass without altering the overall shape of life. This reinforces the sense that the main story has already been told. What remains feels like an extended pause rather than a final chapter. In ancestral life, this pause was brief. Modern medicine lengthens it dramatically. The body remains alive, supported and protected, while the narrative momentum stalls. This can produce gratitude and unease at the same time. Gratitude for continued existence. Unease because existence no longer feels oriented toward anything. Biology does not intervene to resolve this tension. Evolution never designed mechanisms to generate purpose once survival was assured without effort. Medicine fills the gap in function, not in direction. As a result, Many people experience late life as a time that is present, but not progressing. The body is maintained. The mind remains aware. Yet the sense of moving toward an ending that would give shape to what remains is absent. Death is distant, but conclusion has already arrived in another form. Understanding this helps explain why extended life can feel complete before it is finished. The completion is not biological, it is structural. The forces that once defined the arc of existence have withdrawn. What remains is time sustained by care rather than by need. Life continues, but it does so without insistence, without pressure, and without a clear destination. This is the quiet consequence of survival extended beyond design. The body persists within systems built to delay the end, even as the experience of living has already reached a natural stopping point. When biological purpose, social necessity, and survival pressure have all receded, what remains is a question that evolution never needed to answer. The human body can continue. Society can support that continuation. Time can stretch far beyond its original frame. But none of these forces explain what this extended existence is for. This moment marks a quiet turning point. For most of human history, meaning was not something that needed to be created. It emerged automatically from conditions. Survival demanded action. Reproduction demanded care. Memory demanded transmission. Each stage carried its own justification. Once those justifications were fulfilled, life usually ended soon after. Modern humans now live beyond that sequence. They inhabit a phase of life where nothing external insists on continuation, yet continuation persists. This exposes a boundary in human design. Biology does not generate new imperatives once old ones are complete. Society can offer roles, but those roles are optional and often temporary. When they dissolve, nothing intrinsic replaces them. The individual is left facing time without instruction. This is not a flaw in character or culture. It is the consequence of living longer than the systems that once organized existence. In this space, meaning becomes detached from necessity. It can no longer rely on urgency or obligation. It must arise, if it arises at all, from deliberate choice. This requirement is historically new. Humans evolved to respond to pressure, not to invent purpose in its absence. The difficulty many experience later in life reflects this mismatch. They are not failing to adapt. They are encountering a condition that has no biological precedent. Life continues without being required to continue. Awareness remains without direction. This does not mean extended life is empty by default. It means emptiness becomes possible in a way it was not before. Meaning is no longer enforced by survival. It becomes something that must be sustained consciously or allowed to fade. Biology does not intervene either way. It remains neutral. This neutrality can feel unsettling because it offers no guidance. Yet it also reveals something important. The end of biological purpose is not the end of existence. It is the end of automatic meaning. What follows is not decay alone, but openness. Time remains. Consciousness remains. The question of what to do with them is no longer answered by evolution, society, or necessity. It is left unresolved. This unresolved state defines the final phase of modern human life. A life that continues beyond its original design must be lived differently, or it will feel as though it has already ended. Not because death has arrived, but because the forces that once shaped life have withdrawn. Understanding this does not solve the problem. It clarifies it. The human organism was never meant to carry itself indefinitely. When it does, meaning must come from somewhere else, or nowhere at all. The question that remains is not how long life lasts, but what happens to a life when it outlives every reason it was built for. Once automatic meaning dissolves, the human experience becomes radically exposed. Without survival pressure or biological mandate, life no longer arrives pre-shaped. Days are no longer organized by necessity. Effort is no longer demanded by consequence. What remains is choice. But choice without pressure behaves differently. It does not compel action. It waits. Many people assume freedom should feel expansive, yet freedom without structure often feels weightless. When nothing must be done, doing anything can feel arbitrary. This is the quiet difficulty of extended life. The body remains capable, the mind remains aware, but neither is pushed forward by forces outside the self. Evolution never trained humans for this condition. Our nervous systems are tuned to respond to urgency, to adapt under constraint, to find meaning through resistance. When resistance disappears, motivation softens, attention drifts, the sense of direction weakens. This is not apathy, it is the absence of external alignment. In earlier phases of life, alignment was automatic. Biology and environment pointed in the same direction. In later life, they diverge. Biology withdraws its investment. The environment continues to sustain life. The individual is left between them. Some respond by filling time with activity. Others retreat into observation. Neither response is inherently right or wrong. Both are attempts to inhabit time without instruction. What becomes clear, however, is that meaning can no longer be inherited. It cannot be assumed. It must be constructed or released. This requirement is unprecedented in human history. Never before have large numbers of people lived so long beyond necessity. Never before has existence itself become optional in terms of justification. The discomfort many feel is not fear of death. It is discomfort with openness. Life has become something that must be chosen repeatedly without external demand. Biology does not assist in this choice. It remains neutral. Society may offer distractions, roles, or narratives, but these are not binding. They can be accepted or ignored. When they fade, nothing internal replaces them automatically. This reveals a fundamental truth. Purpose that is not enforced by necessity behaves differently. It is quieter, more fragile, more dependent on internal coherence. Without pressure, meaning must be sustained deliberately, or it will dissolve. Some individuals find depth in this condition. Others feel a gradual fading. Both experiences are consistent with the absence of biological instruction. The organism continues, but it no longer tells itself why. This is the final consequence of living beyond design. Life persists without resistance, without demand, and without guidance. The question that emerges here is not moral or philosophical in origin. It is structural. What does a human life become when it is no longer required by anything outside itself? Evolution does not answer. Biology remains silent. Time continues. The individual remains. Whether this state feels empty or spacious depends entirely on what fills the silence, and that silence is not a failure of life. It is the condition left behind when every automatic reason for living has already been fulfilled. At the far edge of a life that has outlasted its original design, nothing dramatic necessarily happens. There is no final signal that announces arrival at this stage. What appears instead is stillness. The body continues its routines. The mind remains aware. Time keeps unfolding. Yet the forces that once shaped movement, urgency, and direction are no longer present. This is not decline in the usual sense. It is completion without closure. The human organism has fulfilled every task it was built to perform. What remains exists beyond instruction. In this space, meaning does not arise automatically, but neither is it forbidden. It becomes optional. This optional quality changes everything. When meaning is no longer required for survival, it loses its sharp edges. It no longer compels. It no longer organizes life by necessity. It appears quietly, if it appears at all, through attention rather than action. Many people misunderstand this stage as emptiness, but emptiness implies lack. What exists here is absence of pressure. The absence can feel unsettling because human consciousness evolved under constraint. Constraint provided shape. Without it, experience becomes open and unforced. Life no longer pushes forward. It simply remains. This remaining can be interpreted as stagnation or as space. Biology does not distinguish. It has already withdrawn. The final phase of life, as extended by modern conditions, reveals something evolution never needed to address. Existence does not require justification to continue. It only requires systems that allow it. Once those systems are in place, life can persist without answering why. The feeling that life has ended before death is not a mistake. It is recognition. Recognition that the arc defined by purpose, necessity, and survival has already completed itself. What follows is not an extension of that arc, but something different. a long plateau where time is present without demand. This plateau was once rare and brief. It is now common and prolonged. The human mind encounters it without inherited guidance. Some respond by searching for new meanings, others allow meaning to dissolve. Neither response is wrong. Both are natural in the absence of instruction. The important realization is quiet and simple. Life does not promise to feel necessary forever. It promises only to continue while it can. When necessity ends and continuation remains, the experience of living changes fundamentally. The final message of this long human story is not tragic. It is sober. Human lives were never built to last indefinitely in meaning. They were built to fulfill specific purposes and then release their grip. Modern humans now live beyond that release. What happens next is not decided by biology. It is lived moment by moment, without urgency, without mandate, and without a script. The question that closes this exploration is not how to restore the old sense of purpose, but whether purpose must always come from necessity at all. When survival no longer demands meaning, what kind of life remains possible in the silence that follows? Life does not conclude when the body stops working. For many people, it concludes earlier, when the systems that once gave life direction quietly fall away. Survival no longer demands effort. Society no longer requires participation. Biology no longer insists on renewal. What remains is existence without pressure, time without instruction, and awareness without urgency. This state is not a mistake. It is the natural result of living beyond the conditions that once shaped human life. For most of our history, this phase barely existed. Now it stretches across years, sometimes decades. In that stretch, nothing forces meaning to appear, but nothing prevents it either. Life becomes lighter in demand and heavier in openness. Some experience this openness as peace. Others experience it as emptiness. Neither response is wrong. Both arise from the same condition, a life that no longer needs to justify itself to survive. Evolution has already stepped back. Society has already moved on. The body continues because it can, not because it must. In this quiet space, the old question of purpose loses its urgency. What matters is no longer what life is for, but how life is lived when nothing is required of it. When necessity disappears, attention becomes the only remaining force. Attention to breath, to presence, to memory, to the simple fact of being here. The human story does not end with a lesson or a solution. It ends with an opening into time that no longer pushes back. In that stillness, the final question is not about survival, achievement, or meaning imposed from outside. It is simpler and more personal. When life no longer needs you for anything, what kind of life do you choose to remain inside?